I arrived at the high-end Austin Bistro precisely at 7. My family was already seated, dressed perfectly for a photo opportunity that wasn't happening. The atmosphere was brittle, staged, designed to make me feel small. Across the white linen tablecloth, my mother, Susan, didn't offer a greeting. Instead, she slid a flat industrial gray envelope toward me. It was cold, calculated, a meticulously designed tool of disownment. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know your story down in the comments. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I opened the envelope without a tremor in my fingers. Inside rested a thick stack of legal paper, titled Voluntary Severance and Mutual Release Agreement. I scanned the first paragraph, taking in the clinical terminology that sought to formalize the end of our familial ties. Then, my eyes caught a detail on the second line. They had misspelled my middle name. It was the final, perfect act of neglect. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I looked up at Susan. She sat perfectly rigid, her posture a masterclass in emotional distance. People often wonder how a mother can be so relentlessly cold, but it is simple mathematics. Susan didn't want a family. She wanted a franchise. In her world, love was a currency used to purchase compliance, and affection was a subscription service. If you didn't fit the pristine, country club aesthetic, you were a liability on her social ledger. Her cruelty wasn't an accident. It was the trap of ruthless normalization. By constantly defining what was acceptable, what was prestigious, she normalized the emotional starvation of anyone who didn't conform. She needed this perfectly controlled facade to mask the absolute emptiness underneath, building a prison of impossible standards and calling it a home. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, continually footing the emotional bill with my self-worth while they reaped the dividends. Now, looking at this severance contract, I realized the investment period was permanently over. Beside her, my father, Gary, stared at his water glass, offering his usual silent cowardice. He was the compliant board member, rubber-stamping every one of Susan's toxic directives. My sister, Jenna, held her phone casually, her thumb hovering near the record button, practically salivating for a meltdown. They were waiting for me to break. They expected a tearful negotiation, a desperate plea to remain on their exclusive roster. They thought they were initiating a hostile takeover of my dignity. Instead, I looked directly at the waiter passing by our table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady and clear. "May I borrow your pen?" The waiter handed me a sleek silver pen. I clicked it open, smoothed the heavy paper against the linen, and signed my name on the dotted line. I made sure to write my middle name clearly, with the correct spelling. I flipped to the final page, signed that one too, and slid the entire packet back across the table. Susan's mouth parted slightly, her carefully constructed mask slipping just a fraction. Gary finally looked up, blinking in confusion. Jenna's thumb froze over her screen. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. "Keep the pen," I told the waiter, leaving a generous tip on the table, more than enough to cover my drink and the service, before I walked out without another word. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out of the bistro without looking back. The transaction was complete, and for the first time in my life, my accounts were perfectly balanced. I had always been the problem child. While Jenna pursued degrees in public relations and dated junior executives, I spent my time analyzing supply chain inefficiencies and coding logistics algorithms. To my parents, my interests were an embarrassment. They couldn't brag about freight optimization at their country club dinners. When I moved into a cramped, shared co-working space on the wrong side of the river, they treated my address like a terminal diagnosis. They mocked my late nights, my modest apartment, and what they called my tragic lack of ambition. But they didn't understand the fundamental laws of leverage. They thought they were holding me down, but they were actually leaving me alone. Being labeled the black sheep of a family is often viewed as a curse, an invisible chain that binds you to a lifetime of feeling inadequate. You spend years believing their assessment of your worth, wondering why your absolute best is never quite enough to earn a seat at their table. But that is the invisible chain of the survivor. It is a psychological illusion designed to keep you small. Once you stop trying to break the chain and instead coldly examine it, you realize it isn't tethering you to the floor. It is keeping everyone else out. That label of the supreme disappointment was actually my greatest asset. It was the ultimate undercover incubation period. Because they expected nothing from me, they demanded no oversight. They didn't audit my time, they didn't scrutinize my professional network, and they certainly didn't track my revenue. While they were busy maintaining their superficial empire of appearances, I was quietly building a very real, very profitable one. My co-working space wasn't a sign of failure. It was the initial headquarters of a logistics architecture platform that was actively restructuring how freight moved across North America. My co-working space wasn't a sign of failure. It was the headquarters of a logistics platform that automated freight routing, fundamentally changing how goods moved across North America. I didn't waste a single ounce of energy defending my vision to people who lacked the basic capacity to understand it. I simply put my head down and built the infrastructure. Every sneer, every excluded family dinner, every casual insult about my lack of prestige was just another data point confirming I was on the right path. I wasn't isolated. I was beautifully insulated. Their relentless judgment provided the perfect camouflage, giving me the absolute privacy to scale my platform without their interference, their opinions, or their inevitable demands for a cut of the equity. I secured venture capital from silent partners who cared about algorithms and execution, not social aesthetics. By the time I sat at that bistro and signed those disownment papers, my company was already handling thousands of transactions a minute. I didn't need their inheritance or their approval. I had engineered my own empire, brick by digital brick, while they were busy looking the other way. The family separation wasn't a tragedy. It was just a final audit, clearing the toxic liabilities off my books so I could operate with total efficiency. The very neglect that was meant to destroy me had been the exact environment I needed to thrive. The backlash was executed with the precision of a coordinated marketing campaign. Just 24 hours after the bistro, Jenna uploaded a heavily edited video to her social media channels. She had cut the footage perfectly, removing her smirk and my mother's coldness, leaving only the moment I handed the signed papers back to the waiter with a $100 bill. She added a tearful voiceover claiming I had laughed at my family's heartbreak, that I had thrown money in their faces and gleefully abandoned them. The public vitriol poured in immediately, thousands of comments analyzing my posture, calling me an ungrateful sociopath, a cold-hearted narcissist who didn't deserve a family. It was a masterclass in brand manipulation. But panic is for amateurs. I viewed the digital mob not as a threat, but as a metric of their desperation. Then the phone calls started. Susan called first, bypassing any pretense of sorrow. She informed me that if I ever tried to contact the family again, she would file a restraining order. She threatened to call the police if I set foot near their property. 10 minutes later, Gary sent a clinical text message stating he had packed up the few childhood belongings I had left in their attic and donated them to a local charity. He wanted me to know that every trace of my existence had been officially liquidated from their premises. They were doubling down on their public narrative, aggressively shorting my stock in the court of public opinion. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to scramble, to issue a frantic public apology, to engage in a messy digital war that would validate their victimhood. I gave them nothing. Anger wasn't useful here. Strategy was. I didn't block their numbers. I simply documented the communications. I opened a secure file and logged every threat, every message, and the manipulated video. Then, I forwarded the entire dossier to my corporate attorney. We didn't draft a tearful rebuttal. We drafted a strategy. My attorney immediately initiated a quiet, systematic legal counterattack, preparing cease and desist orders and gathering data on Jenna's libelous claims. Holding them in reserve, I authorized a full sweep of my digital footprint, locking down my privacy settings, not out of fear, but to ensure they couldn't access any data regarding my upcoming professional milestones. I watched them escalate their hostility, posting updates about their grief and their resilience, collecting sympathy from their network. They were so focused on winning the public relations battle that they failed to realize they were fighting on the wrong battlefield. They thought they were burying my reputation. They didn't understand that they were just digging their own graves, handing me all the evidence I would ever need. Every cruel post, every threat, every lie was another nail. I sat in my downtown office, watching the metrics of their self-destruction roll in, feeling nothing but cold, absolute clarity. The legal groundwork was laid. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. 6 days later, the board was set for the final acquisition. The Global Supply Chain Summit was the premier event of the year, held in the massive Glass and Steel Convention Center in downtown Austin. Thousands of industry leaders, venture capitalists, and logistics executives had gathered to discuss the future of global freight. I was the closing keynote speaker. It was the moment my company would officially step out of stealth mode and announce a merger that would redefine the industry. Meanwhile, Jenna, ever the opportunist, had managed to secure premium seats in the 8th row for the entire family. She had seen the summit advertised and recognized the logos of the massive corporations sponsoring the event. In her mind, this was the ultimate networking goldmine, a place to rub shoulders with billionaires and secure her next high-status boyfriend. She had convinced Gary and Susan to attend, pitching it as a prime opportunity to elevate their social standing and distance themselves from the recent family drama. True to form, Jenna had been so hyper-focused on the prestige of the event that she had completely failed to read the fine print. She saw the sponsor list, but she never bothered to check the email invite containing the name of the keynote speaker. She didn't realize the event was titled, "The New Architects of Global Logistics." As I stood in the wings, the heavy velvet curtain shielding me from the auditorium, I ran through my presentation metrics one last time. My pulse was steady. The stage manager clipped the microphone to my lapel, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see the vast sea of faces illuminated by the stage lights. And there, sitting dead center in the 8th row, was my family. Susan was adjusting her designer scarf, looking thoroughly bored but determined to appear important. Gary was scrolling through his phone, ignoring the people around him. Jenna was practically vibrating with excitement, holding her phone up, ready to record the keynote for her followers, eager to prove she had access to this elite inner circle. They were holding their cameras, ready to document the brilliance of an industry titan, completely unaware of the collision course they had just chartered. I watched them for a long moment, analyzing the geometry of the situation. There was no spike of anxiety. There was no hesitation. The universe had delivered the perfect audit. They had come to worship power, wealth, and prestige, the very currencies they believed I severely lacked. They had come hoping to capture a moment of elite brilliance, hoping to network their way into a higher tax bracket. They were sitting right there, ready to film the inevitable failure of anyone who wasn't them. I took a slow, calculated breath. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The low murmur of thousands of voices faded into an expectant silence. The overture was finished. It was time to flip the board. I didn't need to destroy their narrative. I just needed to walk out there and let reality do the work for me. The announcer's voice echoed through the massive sound system, and I stepped forward, stepping out of the shadows and into the blinding, undeniable light. Please welcome to the stage, the founder and chief architect of Apex Logistics. The voice boomed over the speakers. I walked to the center of the stage, the spotlight tracking my every movement. Before I even reached the microphone, the applause began. It didn't start as a polite smattering. It erupted. A wave of sound crashed over the auditorium as thousands of industry veterans rose to their feet. It was a standing ovation before a single word was spoken. I scanned the front rows. My grandmother, Beverly, was sitting in the VIP section. At 88 years old, the former real estate mogul stood up first, her posture straight as a steel beam, a knowing, razor-sharp smile on her face. She had been the only one who saw my potential when others didn't. Then, my eyes locked onto the 8th row. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. Susan's polite, networking smile froze, then shattered. Her designer handbag slipped from her lap, hitting the floor. Gary stopped scrolling, his jaw slackening as he stared at the massive digital screens flanking the stage, which displayed my face in high definition. Jenna's phone, which she had raised to record the esteemed speaker, wavered in her hand. Her screen was actively broadcasting my entrance to the thousands of followers she had rallied against me. They sat paralyzed, trapped in the harsh glare of undeniable reality. They realized, mid-applause, that they were not witnessing a small-time talk by a stranger. They were witnessing the coronation of an industry titan. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it was permanently liquidated. As part of our merger agreement, the CEO of our primary partnering firm stepped up to the podium to do the formal introduction, acknowledging the strategic value my platform brought to the industry. He didn't just announce me. He said my full name clearly, perfectly articulated, ensuring every syllable echoed through the massive hall. The very name they had treated as a typo was now commanding the respect of the entire industry. Panic, pure and unadulterated, finally set in. I watched the exact moment my parents calculated the social and financial deficit they had just incurred. They were sitting in a room full of people they desperately wanted to impress, applauding the daughter they had just publicly discarded. If anyone connected the dots, their pristine social franchise would be bankrupt. The applause began to die down, and I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I looked past them, delivering my opening lines with the cold, measured cadence of a CEO in total command. In the periphery of my vision, I saw the scramble. Susan grabbed Gary's arm, her face pale. Jenna lowered her phone, her expression a portrait of genuine terror. They didn't walk out with dignity. They scrambled. And the kicker? Jenna's live stream was still running, pointed directly at my parents' frantic, bewildered faces as they shoved past the crowd. The camera captured their complete psychological collapse and the exact moment their social mask finally shattered for all the world to see. They ran from the room. Their exit, a permanent, public record of their ultimate defeat. The balance was settled. By the end of the fiscal quarter, my company's valuation had surged to a record high, cementing our position as a leader in the industry. The merger was a complete success, and my position in the industry was permanently cemented. The fallout for my family was equally absolute. The truth of Jenna's manipulated video, combined with the leaked footage of their panicked exit from the keynote, destroyed their carefully curated public image. The local media picked up the story of the Disownment papers, and their social capital evaporated overnight. They became pariahs in their own country club, their pristine franchise bankrupt by their own actions. I watched their empire collapse from a distance, feeling nothing but total, enduring peace. The weather had finally passed. The storm they brought into my life was over, and all that remained was the work, the beautiful, quiet act of building my own future. I will never forgive them. Forgiveness implies a debt that can be pardoned, but what they did was a systemic deficit of love that cannot be repaid. I don't carry anger, but I also refuse to carry the burden of their redemption. To anyone listening to this, to those who have spent their lives as the black sheep, the overlooked, the one always standing on the periphery of their own family's affection, I see you. I've come to realize that the hardest part isn't the cruelty. It's the hope. It is the exhausting, relentless hope that if you just shrink a little more, or achieve a little more, they will finally love you the way you deserve. I am writing this letter to your heart right now. Stop waiting. You do not need to earn your place at a table that was built to exclude you. The label they gave you is a lie designed to keep you small. Your differences, your unique mind, your refusal to fit into their shallow molds. These are not your flaws. They are your blueprints. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the expectation that they will ever change. You are allowed to sever the connection. You are allowed to walk away from people who demand your soul as currency. Take your brilliance, take your resilience, and go build your own empire in the quiet spaces they abandoned. The family you create, the life you engineer, will be more beautiful than the prison they offered. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and truth.